One of the pitfalls of graywater systems that are oftentimes overlooked, and I overlooked it today and failed to mention it during the presentation, is that when you're traveling, you're no longer having somebody there on the property. If you're away from the house, you're not there, the irrigation system's off unless you happen to have a house sitter who's coming and showering for you, washing laundry, washing dishes. So those periods of drought, like Damien said, could kill a plant that you have in your system if it's dependent on that regular water. The other big problem is that I've seen is having a graywater system that is chronically giving water to these plants provides for really weak plants that are accustomed to having a chronic drip of water with very shallow root systems. So the graywater systems that I've installed, I've seen a lot of these trees be less resilient than trees that were say planted with infrequent deep waterings that would train the trees to send their roots deeper. So they tend to have very shallow root systems because they don't need to have deep root systems because there's chronically water there. So when you have a system set up where they're getting water so frequently and then there's 2-3 weeks with no water, it could be too much and you could lose, fruit trees, whatever might be on that system. And I've had that experience myself personally where I lost a fruit tree that was just not able to handle that 3-week shock without water.
Yeah, and then another pitfall, which we're experiencing at the Harrison house right now, is maybe you have a plant that's like doing fine on a small amount of water, and then you have maybe you have a whole bunch of relatives come over and taking lots of showers and like so much water all of a sudden, and we've got an elderberry that's like really not happy because it was just inundated with water all of a sudden. So,
and that's where having that diverter valve for a rare occasion like that, ideally if you had another zone or something that could handle just an occasional watering, something that you're not usually set up with graywater, but it's your overflow zone. Like, okay, when we have those big events and it gets too much water, it'd be so nice to have that second zone set up to divert, or worst case scenario, divert back to septic or sewer, for a brief moment.
But again, like if you choose a species, there's certain species that are fine, like the mesquites are like, they're like fine if it's like months between watering, and then they can just be like up to their 6 feet of water in there, like fine
for 2
too.
weeks.
Yeah,
so tough.
Yeah. That's what we're looking for.
So that's a good species that can handle, flood and drought. That mesquite, yeah. And the desert willows too, because they're right there in the washes.
Yeah.
They're going from extreme dry, long drought periods to being, inundated with water and debris, crunching into them, and they're tough.
Yeah. I wanted to, when we're talking about species, this is such a good resource. Brad Lancaster's book, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. In the back, he has all these tables with different dryland species, and it's so much information about how much water each of the species needs and how resilient it is to having times of drought, and there's so much information in here. So this is a really good go-to if you're thinking about for your designs what to plant. And then also I love this book, Temalpak, Cahuilla Indian Knowledge and Usage of Plants. Just this amazing ethnobotanist that basically has cataloged the way that the Cahuilla have used the hundreds of desert species for food and everything they needed. And so for a permaculturist, this is just a gold mine. So anyway, those are some resources. Also, I like the Plants for a Future database online. It's a website and has just so many species and so much information, and they're all they're all kind of with an emphasis on useful edible plants. And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that into this as we're starting to think about what to plant too.
So my inclination when I first came out here with Eva a couple weeks ago was twofold. One is shade on the west and one is windbreak. Did you guys notice the moment you turn the corner? Just a little stronger winds. So me personally, I'm leaning towards over in this area, shade and wind. Love to hear any thoughts you might have with that and species selection and things like that. Keeping in mind the Graywater source would be a kitchen sink at that end.
Yeah, I always look at the west side first in terms of, because you're going to basically create a little oasis, because you have all, like somebody was saying earlier, it's basically like a spring, you know, you can think of it that way. And we need to know how much water it's actually going to be, because that's going to make a big difference how much is planted and what is planted. But I always look at first the west, then the east, and then ideally, you know, you can have shade like all around from the west all the way to the east is ideal.
My personal experience out here for kitchen sink systems is that we get a lot more oils and fats, and that I feel like we need to split at least twice. So if you only have one split and you have 50% of the water going to each location, I've found it to be too much water and not enough absorption into the soil because of the oils and fats, and it requires much more maintenance, frequent maintenance. So I suggest splitting twice and having 25% of the water going to each outlet as a minimum. And if you're producing a lot of kitchen sink water, then you'd probably have to split even more and spread that water further. But that's where observation can come in and see over time how you're doing. Also at my home system, in the summer months, it's doing great. And I found in November, December, when it cools off and my plant's water needs are going down, I end up having too much water. So it's just right for the spring, summer, fall, and early fall, and a little too much water in the late fall and winter. So there could be some adjustments that are made for that. Warren, do you have any thoughts on?
Just, you know, one of the things Art Ludwig talks a lot about is the three-way valve. And I know you just mentioned it a minute ago, but having the option in the winter to send it to, like, one thought is like even into a bioswale to bank the water down into that system. Even if you're not putting it into a really high biologically active above ground system, it is still a mulch system that has, you know, hopefully some mycelium and some other something else that could take the water in the winter and infiltrate it. But that was just one thing that I have found, is that during the winter months, another option is that you use a three-way valve to go to a greenhouse. And then we use that in a greenhouse system. So if that is something that's being a part of this design, because you're all designers here, that could be another option that there, you know, it could flip over during the winter and be able to use the water in that scenario.
And that's in addition to the first three-way valve that would be underneath the kitchen sink. That gives the user the ability to switch between sending the water to the garden and sending the water to the existing septic system, which is a whole nother reason. That's for building code reasons, to be able to have that ability to switch back and forth. That's what we're required for a permitted system, is to have that three-way valve user control. But in addition to that, having a second one out here, great idea to have, you know, another zone.